Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give everyone maybe another minute. I can see people joining in. Thank you for making the time for this. Great. So maybe we can start with quick introductions while we wait for more participants to join. Again, thanks everyone for joining. I am Patrick, co-founder and CEO of Tracera, a company I built while I was working at Bain & Company a few years ago. Tracera is a sustainability data management platform that helps you automatically collect, audit, and report on sustainability data. Joining me today, I'm very grateful and lucky to have Gary joining from CDP and Casey joining from Bain & Company, and Poppy, who's my teammate, who supports our customers day in and day out with their CDP, CSRD, ISSB reports and beyond. Maybe, Carrie, if you don't mind jumping in with a quick introduction.
Sure. Hi. Nice to meet everyone, even though I can't see you. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at CDP. And I started with CDP in this new role of growth last November, as we start to think about where disclosure is heading, and particularly in the field of advanced analytics and advanced computing power. So prior to that, I worked with Johan Rockström, for any of you who know Planetary Boundaries. I spent a couple years working with him and a network of scientists on building the annual planetary health check. So pretty steeped in the why. If you've hung around Johan long enough, you get the sense of urgency quite distinctly. So happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Carrie. Casey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Casey Stelmach. I'm a director on Bain's global sustainability team. I've been with Bain & Company for 9 years at this point, and 5 of those have been on our sustainability team. I oversee the team that does Bain's annual disclosures. We do 8 of them at this point, and CDP is, of course, one of our biggest ones. It's one that is quite important to a number of our clients, and we invest quite a lot of time into these reports. Bain's made the A-list for the past 2 years, which we're very happy about, and my team is currently hard at work on this year's disclosure.
Thank you, Casey. Poppy.
Hi everyone, I'm Poppy. I'm part of Tracera and I work as a sustainability product specialist. I work on calculating scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions, as well as helping our clients fill out the CDP disclosures and everything else they might need.
Thank you, Poppy. Maybe before we jump into the presentation and Q&A, I just want to remind everyone the session is being recorded, so we will share the recording with you after. Also, if you would like to ask questions, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A chat box. We will have 15 minutes towards the end to go through your Q&A. Also, we may be able to answer them as we go, depending on the question. Let's make this interactive. This session is really about you. We want to add value to you. We want to support you on this journey. And we're very grateful for your time. With that, Carrie, pass it over to you to go through the next.
Just as a quick overview, and we can go into any questions you have around this and how it's changed perhaps from 24 to 25. But you can see on the right side, we have the criteria and what's offered through our SME questionnaire and then the full corporate questionnaire. And this is pertinent to scoring because, as many of you know, we have in our environmental topics, we also have biodiversity and plastics, which are a little more nascent, but aren't yet scored. And we hope to bring those on board sometime in the near future. So, we do delineate what is a SME versus not. We are constantly in the process of assessing where the standard setters are moving, and they are quite moving targets, and how we can harmonize as much as possible. That's where we feel our primary value is to the field, is to help the standard setters and the regulators understand that we're trying desperately not to increase the burden of reporting by finding harmonization across these different platforms. Some are still evolving, like TNFD. So, this is a constant iterative process. And the real point of disclosure is not just the transparency, but it is by, engaging leadership at the highest level, the board level, the C-suite level, all the way down into the strategy to understand opportunity and risk, which we can talk about a little bit later. This is where we find high value. And what we see in our data, just to reinforce where we've heard from clients, some of the use cases for disclosure, we use an ABC. A is access to capital. We've had many of our A-listers get low cost of capital because of their A scores. There's B for business resilience or business utility. And then C is for compliance. And that gets to the interoperability.
Thank you, Carrie. I think we're going to make this session interactive, so we're going to go through a set of questions. Perhaps actually the first question for you, Carrie, is would you mind sharing what changed the 2025 CDP questionnaire? What stayed the same vis-a-vis the 2024 version?
Yeah, most of the big changes were in 2024. So those of you who went from 23 to 24, and thank you for your patience in dealing with some of the transition challenges. We understand that was quite difficult because of different technical issues and also just a lot of change at one time. So 25 is what we call a year of stability. We did not want to bring a lot more changes to the market. I could just reinforce that from a scoring perspective, we did change and make the criteria for the A-list a bit more robust. Mostly the monetary incentives at the highest level of governance, involvement in public policy, alignment with Paris Agreement, science-based targets, and the things you might expect. But for essential criteria for scoring progression, again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of governance, board level oversight, senior management responsibility, governance mechanisms and agendas. We also have a portion on strategy and risk, and I think we'll show you some slides later on that, by being able to really look at the opportunity and risk space, you can start to see where things are paying off. We call that our dividend report, which you'll see the dividend disclosure. And then transition plans, as you would expect, that we see companies go from level 1, disclose, all the way to having science-based targets, transition plans, and board oversight. So that would what we would say classifies an A-lister in our list. So I guess my point in all of this is, the few things that may have changed a tad bit more from 23 to 25 and still is that companies are scored only in their primary sector for certain questions, ensuring that benchmarking reflects sector content. So if there's any confusion about that, I'll kick it over to Poppy. She's much more familiar with our questionnaire and working with clients who are filling it out than I am. So if you have any specific questions about those elements, please, I'll turn it over to Poppy.
Yeah, I was just going to mirror what you said. I think everything CDP has changed this year is to make it easier for people to fill out. They published extensive requirements and details on what has changed for each individual question. It says the type of change, so no change, modified guidance. Over 70%, there was no change at all. And then other than that, most of it just included modified guidance with more detail on how to fill out the questions and exactly what you need to include. So very good progress for this year, and it's made it a lot easier for our clients and what I've seen for people to fill out the questionnaire and pull from their previous year's responses.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Poppy. Maybe Casey, turning it over to you. Bain has been able to achieve an A score for many years now. Would love to hear from you. What are some of the essential criteria that companies must meet to be able to get a high score?
Yeah, so building on what Carrie said, a lot of this comes into how have you integrated sustainability within the company as a whole. So bringing in, linking it to enterprise risk management, bringing this into the governance conversations, making sure that sustainability is a topic of conversation at the highest levels. That there are appropriately senior folks who are overseeing the program and have real tangible responsibility for executing on it, for building the transition plan, and at the highest criteria on this, having financial incentives tied to this as well. So I think a lot of this is, it tracks along with what's considered best practice in terms of sustainability and actually building this into a company's processes as opposed to just a siloed, separate function.
Thank you, Casey. Maybe flipping the question also to you, Casey. What about watch out? What last minute mistakes do you see companies most often make, like missing references, mismatched data, or incomplete scope 3 details?
Yeah. So the CDP questionnaire is quite complex. It's, this is one of the benefits of it is how detailed it gets and what the high quality level of data. But the flip side of that is that it can be a little bit challenging as a discloser to make sure that you're getting everything. Bain has made several of these mistakes ourselves. A couple years ago, we dropped an entire table of recs that was being uploaded for our renewable electricity certifications and wound up getting dinged on the score just because of administrative oversight there. Even last year, even at the A-list level, we still occasionally miss fields. There was one this past year with one of the risks where we forgot to specify the other metric that was required for one of the risks that we disclosed. So I'd say a lot of it just comes down to really going through the disclosure again with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that there's not empty fields, because those are always going to be an issue on scoring, and double checking that all the numbers are correct and that you've got the complete data that you meant to upload.
Thank you, Casey. Very insightful. Maybe Carrie and Poppy, perhaps starting with you, Carrie. We're almost midway through August, and the deadlines are approaching. So in your opinion, what are some quick wins that can still be implemented in August to improve your score without having to redo your full submission?
I highly recommend that you look at the scoring methodology and the essential criteria. And if you've got to QC anything in last term, QC that, specifically if you're striving for an A or a really good score. Obviously, it's all important, but I think seeing how the questions are weighted will give more insights into making sure that those are sufficiently answered. We've seen some things that we fixed on the tech side in our scoring methodology, like if you put other specify and specify, it may not count. So we're fixing those things so that, it's not like you have to know which of the drop downs to pick to get the A per se. But, that's why we have a process for working with industry, working with disclosures on their scores, if and when there's some confusion about where things landed. But the essential criteria is the most heavily weighted. And the only other thing I would say, is all companies, all A-listers, and Casey, you can jump in here, it's a journey. It's not you start disclosing and then you're an A-lister. It does take time. We've seen companies go through these stages, disclose, set targets, make plans, highest level governance board. So that's okay too. I think, just disclosing itself is a great first step. And then every incremental step is a great next step to the A.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
happy
Carrie.
to weigh in on that as well. Like you said, this is something where we have disclosed for CDP for the past 5 years, and it's only the last 2 years we've made the A-list. As Carrie said, it is a journey. It's something that we learned from every year and looked at what the feedback we were getting from the questionnaire was, what topics were important to our own clients. We get lists from some of our clients of what fields they care about, and that's helped guide our prioritization for what we want to focus on year over year and how we continue to improve our program.
Thank you both. We're actually starting to get a few questions from the audience. Maybe there's one question that I think is very timely because that's the section we're jumping into now, which is, if my company is already reporting under CSRD, what's the point of also doing CDP? aren't we covering the same ground? So I'm going to break this question into 3 sub questions. If it's okay with you, I think sub question number 1 is the alignment of frameworks, right? How is CDP aligning with global frameworks like CSRD, TCFD, ISSB, and beyond? The second question is the reusability of the data. So if you had submitted CDP in the past, how can you reuse some of that data to complete your CSRD today or in the future? And number 3, the benefits of submitting CDP. So maybe if we were to start with the first and second question in terms of the alignment of CDP with CSRD and how CDP is aligning with global frameworks. So perhaps maybe Casey, if you want to start first by just talking about how you're reusing your CDP report to complete your CSRD report at Bain. And then maybe Carrie can talk about the alignment of CDP with other frameworks.
Yeah. So Bain is not subject to CSRD yet because of the thresholds, but we certainly have an eye to compliance on this. And we complete a GRI disclosure, which is the foundational disclosure or a precursor to a lot of the CSRD data points. So we do reuse our data across all of the disclosures that we do. And we've designed our process very specifically to be able to leverage that. A lot of the data for CDP is around the specific analysis on the footprint. And so that data easily transfers across the different disclosures. And then the data on risks and the governance topics very closely aligns with what's in CSRD, what's in TCFD, ISSB. We actually didn't complete a TCFD disclosure until a couple years into disclosing to CDP, and we used our CDP answers as the starting point for how we started to disclose according to that framework as well. So I would say it's very reusable, and it's something that is more a matter of process than specific content.
Thank you, Casey. Maybe Carrie, if you want to
Yep.
talk a bit about the benefits of doing CDP and in addition to doing CSRD, and then also the alignment with other frameworks like ISSB, TCFD, and beyond.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we have a key principle that guides a lot of our strategic direction, and that's called write once, use many, which gets to this concept. Now, you can write it once for GRI, but we want you to be able to use that also for CDP. So this interoperability piece, which will be enabled by technology increasingly, will reduce reporter burden to achieve that alignment. A couple features that we have in our product roadmap: data ingestion capability, an AI co-pilot that helps sort of QC along the way versus kind of getting lost in the big questionnaire. So, I think that our goal is not only the write once, use many, because it is about reducing burden and upping benefit, but that's also a core piece of our strategic product roadmap. I would say that it's a moving target. We've been watching CSRD, go from this requirement to that requirement. For those of you in the US and aware of what's happening here, lots of changes. And so, I think that what we do is have to monitor where the bullseye is moving and try to stay in as much alignment as possible. And I think one of the other key functions we play in the ecosystem is the harmonization. And one example of that is, California is going to be introducing their new disclosure requirement. And, we've been talking with them to try to get them to do this, don't increase the burden. Look at what they're already reporting. Let that count. If they've done it once, don't make them redo it again. And so we do play a role in the ecosystem to try to help manage, the emerging regulatory and standard setters out there.
Thank you, Carrie. Maybe before we jump, I see more questions from the audience. Poppy, do you want to share anything else? I know you've completed many CDP and CSRD reports for many of our clients globally.
Just to weigh in on what Carrie said as well, CDP have released a lot of resources on this. They released the first mapping from CDP to CSRD, particularly for E1, where it shows nearly all of the measurements map from one question to another. So being able to see this and then use your responses from one to the other will be a huge time saver for everyone.
Thank you, Poppy. Perhaps one more question from the audience. Maybe this is for you, Carrie. It's around the deadline for CDP. So the question is around, is the scoring deadline in September? And can you describe the benefits of submitting before the deadline? Is it free to be scored? And what if the organization doesn't want to publish data? What is the value of the score? Thank you.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, ultimately, the value of the score is a signal to the market, and to your investors and to your management and to writ large your customers that you take this very seriously. And I think if you're not taking it seriously, you're not really working in the best interests of your stakeholders, however you define them. So scores represent, again, I don't want to discourage people on the first part of this journey from rushing to A. It is a process. It takes time. But that should be the goal, right? In my point of view, very, candidly, that companies do move from disclosure to target setting to transition plans to senior management involvement. Because if you don't get the alignment, the capital won't flow in the right direction. If it won't flow in the right direction, it flows into the earth, what we call earth negative, right? Having negative impacts. So, I see that as the largest value in the score is, that you've put the work and effort, and we can give you some visibility around that. But it shouldn't dissuade people feeling like, well, if I don't get an A, I don't want people to see my score. Again, I think there's a lot of grace out there. So I would just, I think on the timeline, I think we have a slide, Patrick, don't we?
Yeah, maybe we can move to slide 9, Poppy. Still go to it.
Just to address that, and then, yeah. So you can see here, September 17th, scoring deadline to submit responses eligible for a score. And then so it gives you time from September to November, so a couple months there to submit your unscored responses and all amendments. And then we're going back this year. We were delayed in our release of scores. We were delayed in everything because of the technical challenges of 24, but we're getting back on schedule this year with plans to release scores in December.
And I can add in a
Carrie.
point on the to echo what Carrie said there. The first year that we did our climate disclosure, I believe we did it unscored, and we also do a water security disclosure now because we've had a number of clients request it, and we also did that one unscored the first year. So I do think that we found a lot of value in our first year of reporting of doing that and using that as a learning experience. But to echo what Carrie said, there's a lot of value in engaging with the score and in also thinking about I saw in the question the point about the information being public or being out there for others to see. I think that that's for us really helped us hone a lot of our how we think about the sustainability and how we talk about the sustainability to make sure that we are able to put out information that we feel good about our clients seeing, that we're good about our recruits seeing, and using this as a point to start to shape our own processes as well.
Thank you. Casey, actually, one follow-up question from Pamela from the audience is, and maybe it's for you, Casey, and then for you, Carrie, is can you have your climate disclosure scored, but your water disclosure not scored?
I don't believe so under the current questionnaire process. That used to be possible, but I think that at this point because it's integrated, that's not within the functionality anymore.
I think, well, Poppy, maybe but we do score each thematic area different. So climate, I think, is the most mature, as we know, and probably has the strictest criteria for an A-lister. But now water and forests are scored. So you do get independent scores for the different themes. The other thing that was new to many of our customers was, CDP, like CSRD, did a little bit of materiality assessment, saying if you're in X sector, say technology, and you're building data centers, right? Water is now critical for you to be disclosing on. Now they can choose not to, and they can certainly choose not to be scored, but then that can have an impact on their total score. If there is a significant materiality component that we recognize and it's either not completed or, yeah. So that's another thing to check for, depending on what sector you're in, is if there's relevance for you in the other thematic areas in particular. And of course, we'd love to see as much disclosure. I mean, ultimately, we need to go into circular economy thinking, because that's the way the real world works, right? From take, make, waste. We want to understand the full value chain of that. So without increasing the burden. So challenge on us to do that, but that's where we're heading.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm seeing a lot of questions about value creation, which is the next section, which I'm really excited to dig into because, I want to dedicate my life and many of us in this room as well, Carrie and Casey and Poppy, to investing and supporting companies, investing in climate technologies to be able to create financial value for the organization. And we have a lot of valuable examples we're going to dig into. Maybe last question before we do that. Another question from the audience, maybe for you, Carrie, is around the verification of the answer. So what measures does CDP take to verify answers to questionnaires provided by companies today?
We have a whole team dedicated to it. And I think we are also exploring opportunities to look at advanced, AI and other things to help with that, to reduce the human piece of it, not to eliminate it. We obviously will always need that for quality control, but right now it's very manual. I'm not familiar with the intimate details of how they do it, but I can certainly follow up, or we can follow up, or Poppy, maybe from your work with CDP and clients.
From my side, all I've heard is that it's a very manual process, especially for the narrative responses. But other than that, I think it's kind of like an algorithm for any missing fields and then for the responses that you have. But otherwise, it's just cross-checking with what you've already published.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Maybe jumping into, I'm seeing a lot of questions, which we're going to have 15 minutes towards the end for that. So thank you for sharing all these questions. Maybe shifting gears, because I would love to dig into value creation, right? I think many of us in this room, and I'm in daily conversations with sustainability leaders who sometimes feel overwhelmed with the number of reports they have to submit. And in the last 6 to 9 months, I'm starting to see a trend emerge, which is companies are starting to surface and talk about the financial value that these data collection efforts are bringing to their organization. I know both you, Casey, and Carrie have done a lot of work with that. Specifically, you, Carrie, that is one of the pillars of the work that you're doing at CDP today. So maybe the first question for you, Carrie, and maybe we can flip to slide 7, which I see you did. Thank you. Is what's the disclosure dividend? How can transparent, high quality reporting translate into revenue growth, cost savings, or competitive positioning?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, particularly in what we would consider forward-looking, very engaged in this space, is that they're making significant investments today to mitigate a future risk. And while there's lots of big numbers out there about what that risk is going to be to the economy, nothing looks like anything we want to live with at any level. So what we try to illuminate, and many of our questions get to this, is where they see the opportunity, what the costs are to realize it, and then it's a math number. You can see here, right? It's much better to invest today and mitigate the challenges of the future. And I think more and more we're going to be talking about the spreadsheet, right? The economic spreadsheet of what we might call nature on the balance sheet is, how is it impacting your P&L today vis-a-vis 5 years, 10 years? And while we know 10 years seems like far off, I think the The planet's constantly throwing us invoices that are getting more and more expensive. So I think this speaking the language of finance, speaking the language of opportunity and risk is mitigating some of the headwinds that particularly we see here in the US with ESG backlash. So this is real numbers. This means real things to businesses. And we think it's amazing to track, and we'll start to do more case studies to unpack this, to highlight to the world what that actually looks like, whether you're building data centers with green steel and cement, or you've investing in some high-tech water recycling for data centers, and a myriad of other things that companies are doing to try to reduce the environmental footprint.
Thank you, Carrie. Actually, one of the questions is specifically about that, but actually has a different flavor, maybe for you, Carrie, and for you, Casey, as well, is examples of where CDP disclosures actually led to cost savings, which I know you're presented on this slide, Carrie. And the follow-up question was that leader is trying to build a case internally, a business case internally. I don't know if you have any advice, Carrie, and then Casey, on how you could support this participant with the business case they're trying to build internally.
Casey, you want to go first?
Sure. So for Bain's own reporting and our disclosure, I think a lot of this has been led by more of the opportunity side than the cost side necessarily. We have a client service practice focused on sustainability casework and focused on helping companies with climate transition. And having CDP disclosures, having what we do put out there publicly has really helped bolster our own expertise and our own credibility within this space. I think we view this as an opportunity investment, not least because a number of our clients request this disclosure of us, and we get feedback from these clients that they appreciate the level of detail that we put into this and the level of seriousness with which we take our climate disclosure.
Yeah, and I would just add to that where we see the most progress is when the chief sustainability officer is obviously the point person to surface this data, but to get the CFO's attention, the chief legal officer's attention, the board's attention, and I think that's why governance is so heavily scored and weighted, is that it is the ability to bring the relevant information to the decision makers in your organization, and embed it into the strategic direction of the company. And that's again how you go from disclosing data to becoming a leader in our A-list group.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe one also an important question, because especially for sustainability leaders, many of you are wearing so many different hats, and I would say there's really no organization like another one, because for every single organization, the sustainability function sits beneath a certain department, and sometimes sustainability is seen as a priority or as an advantage or as a risk, depending on how the board level or C-suite members see it. So, I guess the first question is, depending on whom you report into, you want to be able to position it differently, as Carrie stated. But specifically where I'm seeing the most success is when sustainability leaders are positioning this as a financial value creation business case today. It's unfortunate. I would love to live in a world where value definition is beyond financial value, but the reality today, it all has to go back to revenue realization, cost reduction, or risk reduction. So my advice there is start by looking at your competitors. Look at what your competitors are doing, what they're putting out there. For example, we work with one of our clients. They are a building materials company. They have a few $1 billion in revenue. They service customers all over the world in North America and Europe. And for them, their customers, which are real estate developers, were requesting environmental product declaration, which is product carbon footprints. And their competitors were already creating a green product assortment on their website. And that helped build the business case internally for a leadership team that didn't necessarily believe in the financial value of doing these initiatives to actually change their mind and actually, be more proactive and even lead the way, because they're seeing this not only as a way to generate financial value for the organization and win more customers, retain more customers. It's almost existential right now, because in some countries, if you don't have these data points, if you don't have green product assortment in the building industry, you're almost going to be out of business in a few years because of the regulatory pressure that some of these countries in Europe, or countries even beyond Europe, like in the Middle East or APAC, are facing today. So I think understanding your stakeholder and then trying to speak their language and trying to gather data for your competitors and customers is how I would approach it. Thank you for this question. Maybe Casey, one question for you. I know how much work you've done in the last 3 years on making your sustainability data decision grade, not just reportable. Would you be able to elaborate on how technology has been able to assist you thus far on making that data finance grade data?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the level of detail that goes into the CDP disclosure is what makes this such a rich data set and something that is so decision grade, as you put it. Technology has been a really important way of keeping that information organized. We have 83 different offices that we report the emissions for. We purchase renewable electricity certificates across different regions that we operate in. And that's just a lot of rows of data to keep straight and make sure that it's at the QC level. So we use several different platforms to manage our own emissions internally and to manage our CDP disclosure. So we do use Tricera to draft our CDP disclosure. That's been a really helpful tool just for collaboration. It gives us the ability to be looking at each question individually, run it through the right approval processes, and have the right data owner collaborate on each of the sections, and then go through and track whether it's been reviewed, and track to make sure that it's all been signed off on by the appropriate experts internally, by legal, by risk, and then ultimately feed that QC'd disclosure up into the CDP platform. So
Thank
I
you,
guess
Casey.
to summarize that, a lot of it is around making sure that the right people are reviewing things internally, and that you're getting that you're getting the expertise and the internal audit, either formally or informally, weighing in on it really helps make this the high quality data set.
Thank you, Casey. Very powerful. Gary, maybe another question, also digging into value creation. Would you be able to provide some examples of how CDP data directly inform strategic decisions, like entering a market, engaging certain suppliers, disengaging certain suppliers, or even M&A due diligence?
Yeah, well, I think where we learn the most is in our supply chain program. So we've seen, decreased costs in procurement and savings in emissions at the same time by just having that process of requesting through supply chain partners. So we have huge buyers in that program, the Walmarts and the Targets and the Bosches. And so it has deep reach globally, and it starts to have a knock-on effect. And not only the savings to the supply chain partner, but also to see the metrics on climate and nature moving directionally in the right way, or in a good way. We have lots of case studies on our website that are probably a little bit more specific. I mentioned the access to capital, lower cost of capital, business resilience, or business competitiveness, however you want to look at it. But I think the more it's embedded into the strategic direction of an organization, the more likely you are to realize those benefits over time.
Thank you, Carrie. I think the supplier topic is one that is actually rising in interest among many of our clients today and around the world. I think for many companies, specifically the ones we work with that have, where most of their scope 3 comes from scope 3 category 1. And most of the companies that we work with usually have leverage over the suppliers or have control over which raw materials they buy and where they buy them from. It is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. So I'm excited to see more and more of those data points in CDP in the coming years.
One thing that we are looking to partner with a big tech company on is to visualize more of the value chain and sectoral pathways that would illuminate where the green producers, where the green buyers, and can they, and maybe they're already well known to each other, but the more that we can benchmark, spotlight, and show, directionally where we want to be, pushing our mission, which is in an earth positive direction, we can start to see, and hopefully some positive tipping points there where the ecosystem starts to, again, benefit at the financial level and in all other levels as well.
Thank you, Carrie. I would love to talk to you about that separately, but that's pretty exciting. I think there's a lot of potential there. Maybe last question, Carrie. I know you've already touched upon that, so maybe that question is a bit repetitive. But actually, one of the audience did ask us that question, and the question is around: is CDP planning to reintroduce the ability to see other companies' public disclosures, like some sort of competitor intelligence or competitor mapping to be able to understand where you sit as a company vis-a-vis your competitors?
I don't know that we would term them competitors, but I think what's good news about the explosion of ESG is that there's an explosion of ESG and it's starting to be mainstreamed, or let's just say being mindful of your bottom line and how it's related to the planet we live on. You can call it whatever we want. And so we know that there, many people out there that can help, with the preparation of the questionnaire versus other organizations that have some disclosure elements to it. You mentioned EcoVadis. We also see, like Casey said, many companies do both, right? And so I think it would be, better to hear from Casey why you would do both and what the advantages of having multiple players in the ecosystem. I think what we are incredibly mindful of and what we try to talk to partners about is before you start to create a new, disclosure anything, let's make sure we're not adding burden into the ecosystem. Let's find the most efficient way for that data to be materialized. We've been having these discussions around oceans recently since there's no ocean disclosure. And there's a lot of people looking for that data, financial institutions and otherwise. So, we like to work with an ecosystem mentality. So I wouldn't really call it competition, but it would be nice to see sort of a table of the different features and attributes of those in the market that are doing various things. And you could put GRI and PRI in there and other groups that have elements of disclosure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a respondent, I think that we do see value in doing multiple disclosures because they cover different topics with varying levels of depth. So EcoVadis is a particularly helpful disclosure platform for broader ESG concerns. So since it extends beyond climate and beyond the environmental sustainability part, it's a great way for us to disclose on and sharpen our programs around our social programs or our worker-related programs or governance and ethics programs internally. Whereas CDP goes into the most depth on all of these sustainability topics and far more than we've seen for any of the other disclosures that we do. Similarly, GRI, TCFD, WEF stakeholder capitalism metrics, I think they all serve slightly different functions within our portfolio. And it is a lot of different disclosures, and certainly I can understand the perspective of, especially for companies starting out, that feels like it's a lot and it feels like it's a bit repetitive at times, but I think that there are platforms and technology solutions that can help with organizing that information and making it less of an administrative burden to respond to these different disclosures that are out there, and be able to reap the value of considering these different aspects and getting these different ratings or different reports out there.
Casey, thank you for that. Actually, many of the questions in the audience are around this topic. Maybe one follow-up question for you, Casey, is we know Bain also submits EcoVadis and CDP. Actually, I'm not sure if you do Sustainalytics, but you may do it as well. The question is around the value of CDP vis-a-vis EcoVadis and other submissions, maybe specifically around, who's the audience, who's asking you for these? Do you sometimes get requests to submit both, or do you get CDP more, for example, from your customers and EcoVadis from investors or vice versa?
Yeah. So we don't do MSCI or Sustainalytics of the ones listed, but we do CDP and EcoVadis. I would say the audience for CDP tends to be our clients who are really sustainability leaders in themselves and are really invested in having high grade data to feed into their own carbon footprint and their own transition plan and evaluating their own progress. So these tend to be the clients who are most interested in having further conversations with us about our performance, speaking with our chief sustainability officer, and getting more information about our climate progress specifically. We do have, I believe, a couple clients who do both EcoVadis and CDP. Generally, our clients need to pick one or the other. EcoVadis tends to be a bit more popular amongst those who have more human rights in their supply chain concerns, or where that is their main focus of what they're trying to prioritize on their own broader ESG agendas.
Thank you, Casey. Carrie and Poppy, maybe one more question for you as well from the audience before we move to the final section to talk about 2026 and beyond. I know we covered this earlier when we spoke about the overlap between CDP and CSRD. The question that came up now is around the overlap of CDP with ISSP and TCFD, which I know we covered earlier, but perhaps, I don't know if you, Carrie or Poppy, can share some examples on, how they're different and how they overlap more tactically before we move on to talk about the 2026 and beyond.
Poppy, you want to take a go at
Yeah,
that?
I can take it. Sure. So again, they overlap quite a lot. I would say maybe 75% of it is the same. But like Casey was saying, they highlight different things. CDP is definitely more sustainability focused, more about your emissions and detailed methodologies. ISSB, I would say, is more financial, and then TCFD focuses more on your risk. So they highlight different things and they're all useful in different ways, but still being able to pull your responses from each to the other will be really useful if you're able to find a way to do that through a platform or any other resources you have.
Absolutely. Maybe just to add a few thoughts on this as well. CDP in general, we're starting to see more and more alignments, and CDP is starting to align their questionnaires with ISSP requirements. So if you disclose to CDP, that data set will serve as the foundation for your ISSP and TCFD compliance. ISSP, IFRS S2 is starting to adopt the same 4 pillars as TCFD. So we're starting to see a lot of overlap there. And also the CDP climate change questionnaire is already mapped to the TCFD question. So as Poppy mentioned, we're starting to see alignment. At the end of the day, the way you should think of this is, if you do your data capture and collection and processing properly, everything else becomes easy. And investing in that data infrastructure to capture that data, making sure it's decision grade, it's assurance ready, will pay you dividends, not just from complying with frameworks like CSRD or generating reports like CDP, but also to be able to start deriving insights to be able to generate financial value, as you can see on the slide. Again, if any of you feel like your questions have not been fully answered, Poppy and I are more than happy to spend time in person, so feel free to reach out to us after this session. 10 minutes to go. This has been extremely insightful. Thank you, Carrie and Casey. I would love to dig into what's next for CDP. Carrie, you're starting to see trends in the industry, and this climate world is changing fast, and it's exciting. Perhaps a question for you is, what trends are emerging now that might shape future questionnaires for CDP?
Well, I have a lot of perspectives on that. I think that nature is still emerging in how it's showing up in a disclosure framework and what data we pay attention to and what it means and what the materiality is. A lot of great work being done by TNFD and others, SBTN on this. But, that is going to evolve because it's not done work. I think that, as I mentioned, more in the circular economy, really understanding full value chain, and that materiality footprint across the full value chain, wherever you play in it, but having, deeper insights on specific sectors. So we're looking at hard to abate sectors right now and looking at how the evolution for a specific sector might look in a disclosure framework. I also think that plastic is the new carbon. And unfortunately, not great results from Geneva, but, when you look at the cost of human health, 1.4 trillion a year, that was a Lancet report. When you look at what's happening in the municipalities that have to deal with the waste and in countries and in oceans, I think this is increasingly, now we're seeing, the plastic credit market emerging. We're starting to see different incentive programs, but again, that gets to more of the circularity. But this field is constantly changing because we haven't obviously got it all right, and certainly not all right at scale. So I would just say the big enabler, for anybody who does this questionnaire every year, take a deep breath. More is not necessarily more burden. What we want to be able to do is use technology like Copilot really to have a more dynamic journey into what questions, are relevant to you, what questions you want to answer, and how that's served up so that it's a much more dynamic experience. And we want to also build in a lot more data visualization opportunities to show things like, benchmarking and how you're doing against peers, because we do hear a lot from our customers that that's of interest to them. So I think what you can expect from us is a more streamlined process to try to reduce the burden of reporting, like data ingestion capabilities, but also more insights in the disclosure journey itself through the building of dashboards and things that would give you, a better sense on both how you're doing in the disclosure process, but also how you're doing against peers. And I think when it comes to scoring in particular, Copilot will be incredibly helpful to catch those domains that we consider, weighted heavily from a scoring perspective, and make sure that you're not only aware of that, but also aware of the scoring in that moment. So you're not having to look at a long PDF like you have today. So I think all these things point to a world where the data is more meaningful, it's more rapidly available, it's served in a much more dynamic way, and you're getting more insights in real time.
Thank you, Carrie. Carrie, one follow-up quick question from the audience is around whether CDP is planning to score plastics in the future.
Yes, I mean, that is what we have done with other thematic areas, is we've sort of incubated and tested it, get market feedback, evolve it. But as a best practice, we also see the power of scoring in other domains. So I do think it is on the horizon. It's not in our 2025. I don't know if it's in our 26 plans. Maybe we're looking at 2027. So it's still a fairly new thematic area for us, but there's a lot of momentum behind it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carrie. Hey, Bobby, we can just show the timeline slide and move into wrapping up. So maybe just high-level quick recap. Today is August 15th. By September 17th, the scoring deadline to submit responses eligible for a CDP score. The week of November 17th is a deadline to submit unscored responses and all amendments, and the scores are expected to be released by mid-December. Thank you, Carrie, and the CDP organization for all the amazing work you're doing and keeping us all organized. Maybe before we give that time back, Casey, what final advice or insights would you want to provide for our audience in terms of what they can do in 2025 to get ready for 2026 and beyond when it comes to not just submissions, but also other sustainability activities that they would have to lead?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest values of CDP disclosure for us has been being a strong input into understanding what best practices are emerging. So we always use the essentials criteria and use what CDP is scoring to help inform what our strategic priorities should be going forward. So, for example, a couple years ago, we started getting assurance over our carbon footprint, in part because we were looking at the CDP questionnaire, we were looking at what was considered best practice by CDP and saying, this seems like this is important. And now, of course, we're starting to see more regulations that are requiring limited assurance over our carbon footprint. And we're now 3 years into getting that assurance and feel like we've got a really strong foundation to go to that. So I think that that's some of the benefit here is, as you're disclosing on what you're doing this year, is looking to where are some of these essential criteria that we can start building into our process, we can start building into our strategic priorities for next year, that really will help not just with the CDP disclosure next year, but also using that for other regulatory requirements that are coming through.
Harry, any final words of wisdom for the audience?
For those of you who have been with CDP for a while, I want to thank you for your patience during much of the changes that happened in 24. I think we're on a really nice glide path. We're all in this together and just grateful you keep coming back and being so generous with your time.
Thank you, Carrie. Poppy as well. Maybe thank you everyone for joining. Poppy and I would love to chat with you individually, specifically if you have questions around, hey, regulations are changing, where do I start? We can walk you through some no regret activities. Second is if you're trying to build business cases internally, to finance leaders, legal leaders, risk leaders, on why do anything and why do anything now, we would love to support you in building those business cases. Number three, if any of you also are stuck and not knowing where to start to capture data, we're here to support as well. So thanks everyone for your time. Carrie, Casey, super grateful for the insights. Thank you for me. I know it's mid-August. It's warm, regardless of where you are in the world, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're probably picking up the work of many other people who are on vacation. So grateful for you to make the time for this, and Poppy as well, and excited to continue the conversation. Thank you, Carrie, Casey, and everyone for attending.